Well, hello and welcome to Wee Lads Big Problems on Trinity FM. We're not coming to you live from Trinity Halls.
Not as live as usual, anyway.
No, but we've got a brilliant episode for you anyway. We're talking about climate change and green politics this week with Conal Boyle and Ben Rododera. Conal will be talking about Irish green politics. He's got a lot of experience there himself. As previous member of the Green Party, member of the Labour Party now, and as a climate activist. Ben, as we've been trying to do over the last few weeks, is actually from Germany. And he'll be talking to us about German climate politics.
We're really doing great here. We're getting people on who actually know about the issues they're chatting about instead of just...
or we're just good at pretending. So
yeah.
Also, you nailed my name this time, which is really good.
Oh, brilliant. We'll not talk about that.
You did very well with that as well, Evan.
The best podcast hosts never learn how to pronounce the names of their guests before starting recording.
I agree. Those
One
are
of
the
the
best.
rules of podcasting, actually, I believe.
And in order to bring some ineptitude and incompetence into the fray, me and Ryan will be discussing some things as well.
Here, listen, it wouldn't be good crack if we knew what we were talking about.
That's most.
That's I think that's the pitch of the podcast, to be honest. So I think we'll get started. What we're chatting about today is green parties in particular and how they relate to climate politics and how they operate in different countries and the success that they've had in bringing about climate action. So a key thing we're going to be looking at as well is the kind of divide inside green politics between pragmatism and getting small incremental measures passed that can make practical differences, or having an idealist approach that says that a lot of that incremental approach isn't going to get us to where we need to go, and that we need a more radical overhaul of society. And there's a divide in a lot of green parties between this. And what we want to look at is in the different countries that we're going to be looking at. Ben's looking at Germany, Conal's looking at Ireland. I'll be doing stuff in the UK, and Ryan's going to be looking at Denmark. We're just going to look at how that divide plays out and see if we can learn anything about how green politics should be done and how we can get the best results. So with that, Ben, do you want to give maybe just a short introduction to how climate politics has played out in Germany?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think it's kind of perfect timing to talk about the Greens, because yesterday we had some pads. I'm in a park.
It's a green episode.
A lot of green episodes. I'm wearing a green t-shirt, so it's freaking perfect. And also, when we talk about Germany, it's quite interesting because actually just last Sunday, so just 4 days ago, the state that I'm from, the federal state of Baden-Wurttemberg, just had its federal state elections. And so those results are actually quite important because this year there's also the main elections, so the national elections in September this year. And so what federal states have in those elections will obviously determine the result in the national as well. So that's quite interesting to look at that. And not to spoil anything ahead, but it's actually quite interesting because our Green Party in our federal state was by far the largest party.
Really?
Yeah. We can actually jump right into it. They actually gained 32.6% in the election. And that is 8% more than the CDU, which are the Christian Democrats, and they're usually always the biggest party, either CDU or SPD, the Social Democrats. So to have a Green Party be by far the largest is very much...
That's shocking.
Shocking, yeah. I mean, our state has had the Green Party in government since 2011, I believe, and they also were the largest in the last elections, 2016. So it was predictable, but still to have such a huge increase is quite
That's
promising.
amazing.
Yeah,
Great success.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So a lot of things are actually changing. But so yeah, to come back to your question, just in general, I'd say there always has been quite a big green movement within Germany, I guess. probably worldwide, there was this movement in the 1970s, and when there was more awareness of environmental issues and all of that. But so the actual party, which is called Alliance 90, and the Greens, so they've sort of emerged. It was founded in '93, and obviously because we had West and East Germany, so Alliance 90 was East Germany, and the Greens were in West Germany, and they sort of merged together. And the beginning was just to fight against nuclear plants, actually, or that was one of the main reasons. And it
Okay, yeah.
still is, I guess, an important part. Actually, I think after Fukushima, now Germany has decided to fully abandon nuclear plants by the end of next year, I believe. So that is sort of a bit of a success in that way.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, in
Um,
terms of their own policies,
yeah,
they've
exactly.
they were founded around that issue, and that's something that what I'm not sure myself how much you can credit them or discredit or not credit them for, but
Yeah,
it's something that's been achieved.
definitely. Yeah,
I suppose, have they introduced other policy aims over that time? I'm assuming they must have done.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of things that have changed. I think, well, I mean, the main goal is just the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is obviously like the Paris Agreement, which all countries have signed, and that's sort of the target that all parties are going for. Only the thing is, even bigger parties, CDU and SPD, who have committed to that goal, they're just not really taking the action needed to actually reduce emissions. And
That's kind of
so,
the theme, isn't it, with green politics? The parties in power
Yeah.
just never seem
yeah,
to quite get there.
exactly. I mean, it is a great step to acknowledge that, and that's very important. And they do, in Germany at least. I don't know about other countries, but the action that they take is just not sufficient to reduce those emissions by, to keep it below 2 degrees, or at hopefully 1.5 degrees. But I guess when you say what have they achieved, um, it's sort of difficult in a coalition government to say who is actually responsible for those changes, because it is really hard on a national level. They're not in government; they're just in the opposition, and that's why it will be really interesting this year to see whether this changes. I mean, right now in the Bundestag, our parliament, they only have 9% of the votes, because that was from 2017. But as I said, this year there's going to be a new national vote, and that will be really interesting, because even just in 2019, in the European election, the Greens were already the second largest party, and they had
Yeah.
21%, I believe. And that's obviously because of the movement at that time, Fridays for Future and all of that. And so it will be really interesting to see. Many people predict them to be the second largest party, and possibly, I mean, it's probably very optimistic to say that, but it's not completely unrealistic to think that they might actually be the biggest party.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?
That
Yeah.
would be, yeah, life
From the
changing.
point of view of such a big country as Germany, it's such a big player in manufacturing and in the industry.
Definitely.
To have a Green Party as the largest party would be a big game changer, especially for setting climate policy throughout the
Yeah.
EU and
Yeah.
lead by example in that way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it really gets away with this whole idea that any advances in green politics have to be at the cost of, of your net GDP or
Yeah.
of your economic growth, because Germany is obviously a very, very strong
Yeah.
state economically.
Exactly. And that's an argument that often comes out when it's like, well, we still need economic growth. But no one says that environmental policies can't go in hand with economic growth. And I think for example, there's often the idea of a climate tax, which many people oppose to, because they think it's just going to, reduce economic growth. People never like taxes, obviously. But
Yeah.
for instance, it's quite interesting to look at countries that actually have implemented that and where it works. I think, Ryan, you'll be talking about Denmark later, so maybe they have something similar. But in Sweden, for instance, they introduced a climate tax about 30 years ago, and it's now at around 110 or 120 euros per ton of CO2. And so that was increased step by step over the years. And it actually has been really effective, because the per capita CO2 emissions of Sweden are only half of that of Germany.
Okay. Yeah. So
And
like,
yeah, so
um,
and it's still important to say they're still growing economically. Their economy is very much still growing. So it doesn't mean it can't be, the same thing.
I suppose, with a carbon tax, it has to be implemented right for it to work.
Yeah.
Well, that's a bit of a non-statement there, but like, yeah,
No, I know what you mean.
it has to
can
be done right for it to be right.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, but for the carbon tax to go in hand with economic growth, it can't, unfairly punish the poorest in society for having to, buy fuel for their car or heat their house. It has to
Yeah.
be a case where it incentivizes companies and it incentivizes other investments to go towards greener policies in the future.
Exactly. I think that's a really important point, the incentivizing part, because people often talk about banning, and it's just not the most effective way, because there's always going to be some counter movement, and people just will oppose to that completely. And so
Yeah.
incentivizing is a really important step that I think is probably the best bet against climate change as a solution, and that's something that green parties and all parties in general need to do more of. And I think it's already happening right now. I mean, if you look at subsidies to environmentally harmful industries, there are still huge amount of subsidies to the industries, the coal industries, the animal agriculture, who are responsible for a large part of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we just need to change the incentive to put forward the actual price of those products, which includes, having them not subsidizing harmful industries, and in return to actually make renewable energies and all of that cheaper, because then consumers will choose those products on their own and not because they're not allowed to.
Yeah, definitely. That's strategy that a lot of green parties have identified as something they want to do in their policies, is to try to make that more incentivized, pragmatic approach. But just to talk a bit about the divide between, as we were chatting about, the kind of idealism, the more like I don't want to say radical, but that more a holistic view of how we need to restructure society. And then the competing idea that we need to be pragmatic is, and when we're pushing for climate action, the Green Party should focus on things that they can do day to day, or policies they can implement to make a difference now. Where has the German Green Party fallen on this kind of pragmatic, idealistic scale?
So it's obviously always, as I said, like one step to have those goals and one step to actually realize them, and those are very two different spheres, I'd say. I think in general the Green Party is very much accepted within society. It's not as radical as many people in other countries have that view of the Greens, or as it was in the 70s and 80s, when we just thought of hippie eating people who live in the park like I am now, but drinking kombucha all day. Like that's sort of the image that a lot of people still have, and I think that is changing in Germany. And as I say, as they have become, sorry, there's a kid screaming here in the park. As they have become, you can't hear it. Okay. As they've become the largest party or second largest party on the national level, people are very much accepting of them, because they also have a clear structure of politics that is not linked to the environment, of their views on Europe and other things as well. They're not just sort of a protest movement only for climate action, which is an important approach, I guess. And so obviously within the party there will be people who are more radical, and actually the Greens often get criticized within Germany for not implementing many of their goals. But again, as I said, it's sort of hard to say, because we have coalition governments, and on a national level and in many federal states, they are not even part of the government, so they're only in the opposition. So it's really hard to say. I mean, politics is always a compromise, and you can't say, well, you were in government and you didn't achieve your goals. Obviously, you should, but it is just much harder when you're in a coalition, especially when your partner is the CDU or
Yeah,
a
because
fairly conservative party. So
you have to make
yeah,
decisions between you have to make decisions that will allow you to stay in power so that you can achieve at least some of your aims. I suppose
exactly.
is
Yeah.
the I suppose the structure of the German electoral system is very interesting there.
Hmm.
Just because of the federal system,
Yeah.
it allows parties like the Green Party to get experience in government before succeeding nationally.
Yep.
Because so much power is devolved to the states. Like, do you think that might have influenced the way the Green Party has developed? Like, has it pushed
Definitely.
towards more practical policies, and that
Yeah.
they had to succeed on a local level before moving on?
Yeah, I think that's part of the success. I mean, we have 16 federal states, and each of them has their own government, and obviously they will have more space to create, policy changes within their federal state that then directly affect the people. So that there's a bit of a more direct approach to the people, and citizens of that state will then notice those changes much more distinctly. And so, as I said, in my state, Baden-Württemberg, they have been the largest party, and people are generally very content with their government, I would say, and polls say that as well. And a lot of other states do also have the Greens in government. There's all sorts of different combinations of coalitions. There's lots of funny names for them. There's the Jamaica. It's all because of their colors, And
All right, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
They give based on the flag colors and
based on the color of the party, exactly. And then
yes,
they
the colors of the
and then they
partisan
take
flag.
countries. So
Yeah.
Jamaica would be green, yellow, and black. And there is a lot of talk right now, actually, just 4 days ago since the elections, because the results have been so amazing for the Green Party, that even though on a national level the CDU could become the largest party, if the Greens are the second largest and the Social Democrats have an okay result, what could be an option is the so-called traffic lights coalition. And so that would be the Greens, red, so the Social Democrats, and yellow, which are the Liberals, the FDP. And they could, if they form a majority, and no one wants to be in government with the CDU, even though they're the largest party, that could actually happen. And that's a very not unlikely result that we could see in September. And that would also mean that within governments, the Greens would be the largest party, because they will most likely become the second largest party either way. And so that would then also mean that they would um, propose the chancellor, and that would obviously be world changing if we have a green chancellor. Probably, I mean, first worldwide, a green
Yeah,
chancellor.
exactly. If Germany has a chancellor from the Green Party,
From the
that
Green Party, that would
the
be
impact that'll have, especially all over Europe, will be
exactly. So that, and as I said, it's not unlikely that could happen. I mean, most likely it will be a CDU Green coalition, so the CDU would still be the largest party. But even in that case, most people predict that the Greens will be part of the government, and that will be, even that alone will also be quite revolutionary in that way.
Just, I just want to ask before we move on from Germany, what is the core of the Greens' appeal? Do you think, like, do they appeal? Do they appeal to voters like based on a climate agenda or based on
Mm,
an environmentalist agenda, or
yeah.
have they kind of become? Do they appeal on other issues as well? Do they have a wider manifesto?
Yeah. So that's also part of the criticism, because many people say they are not radical enough, as I said. And actually there have been other parties, smaller parties forming, who are more radical. There's a party, even just now on Sunday when I voted, there were four or five other smaller parties who had a more radical green approach. Um, so there is that criticism, but it's also important to say that the main manifesto, I guess, is still obviously climate change and environmental
That has
policies,
significant
and
appeal
that
for German voters.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, and that is very much the core. And also because just in the last 3-4 years, that topic has become increasingly important for almost all people, and people are more aware of the issues, so they have gained a lot just on that alone. But as I said, I guess part of their success is also that they have a very holistic approach, and they're not just this protest party in favor of environmental
Yeah.
policies. They also have a very clear social policy, idea of a welfare state, idea of immigration, obviously very much pro-immigration, pro-Europe. And so those are also things that I guess they gain a lot of voters with.
So
Yeah.
I guess you could say to that extent they're they're not a single issue party
No, definitely not. Yeah.
like other
Like
like
probably most other Green parties, right?
yeah, like a
Yeah.
lot of other Green parties would be like that, or at least you could call that a pragmatic approach in that, like, if you're only appealing on the environment to get
Yeah.
coalition governments to change things,
Yeah.
then you're less likely to turn off other voters with if you're talking about environmentalism or left wing policies.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
to that extent, they have they've nailed their flag to the mast anyway, and they've said this is our entire manifesto. This is what we're going to run on, and they've kind of taken that leap of faith in that if they hadn't gotten that wide support for their whole manifesto, it's unlikely they would have been able to run as a single issue party. They would have kind of given up the benefits of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, totally. And that is probably part of the success as well, that they are just very appealing to all humans. Like even if you think environmental issues won't affect you directly, or you're not too concerned about climate change, which we all should be, but some people just aren't. Even if that's the case, you could still vote for the Greens under all these other circumstances that they want to change the agricultural things and education and all of that. And if that isn't in line with your views, then obviously you would still vote them.
Yeah. So with that, I think we might see what is happening in Ireland with
Yes.
Conal here now. So the Irish Green Party has had an interesting history of government, and it's had an interesting experience that was quite damaging to it back in 2007 when it first went into government. But I suppose, Conal, just how have they managed to, continue appealing to voters? Because they had, in comparison to Sinn Féin, they didn't have quite the success that they were looking for, but they had a great success last general election.
Yeah, well, can you hear me okay for starts? I think there's a bit of a lag
We can
here,
hear
so I
you.
think I might be a few seconds behind. Yeah. So sorry if it sounds like I'm interrupting you at any stage. But no, I think, Evan, what's important to note is that the Green Party between 2011 and 2016 had nothing in the Dáil and had very few councillors. And I think a lot of people like to lay the sole praise on the revival of the Irish Green Party on Eamon Ryan's shoulders. And, obviously he can be thanked for that because he was the leader. But it needs to be noted that there were great people the whole way up the Green Party who maybe now are no longer members of the Green Party because they feel like the last year of being in government
Yeah.
has kind of kind of sort of scratched out all the revival work that had been done in the last 10 years. And I think too what you note is that one of the worst economic decisions in modern Irish history, obviously the bank guarantee, was taken under the watchful eye of John Gormley and the Green Party in government in the 2007-2011 coalition. And you could say that they were rightly wiped in 2011, but you have to say also that credit where it's due to come back in 2016 because of the only party in Irish history to have been wiped out at an election and make a return at the next election. And I think with that growing mood about sort of environmental awareness, I think has really, really stimulated them. But what needs to be said too is that if there is a Sinn Féin surge, or if there's well, maybe not, maybe Sinn Féin's the wrong example, but if there's a surge for a party, quite a lot of it can tend to be off the back of the party's work. Whereas, I suppose one of the benefits of the Green Party is that when we were all out climate striking in the last year before COVID, right? Of course, that's going to have a very positive effect for the Irish Green Party because, as you say, they have set themselves up to be the party of environmental
Yeah,
politics. And I think just the effect of the climate strikes, while not necessarily affiliated with the Greens or in fact affiliated with any political party, of course the Green Party were going to be the ones to benefit from that. And would the Green Party have done as well in 2020 had the climate movement not really taken a massive, massive step forward in Ireland? I'd argue probably they wouldn't have. But that being said, I suppose credit where it's due for the revival that they made. But of course, um, since being in government, there's been a sort of a great exodus. Some cynics have called it as
yeah,
such, and I've been one of those people who've left the Green Party in the last year, just as a result of kind of the things that had been going on, and yeah, that's where I am now. But just to answer your question, kind of about how they built back in the last 10 years, you know, it was a band of a lot of great work from a lot of great people, really, I think.
yeah. And I suppose in terms of the appeal of the party, with going into government in the last year, and I can't believe it's been a year. Like that's mental. But going back into government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, like there
Yeah.
were obviously a lot of political pressures and parliamentary pressures there, but like the key thing for me there that I'm seeing is that like it was a it was a choice along that pragmatic environmentalist single issue
Mm.
line of thinking. That if they could go into government and affect climate policy um, on a very practical level, then that would be a success for the Green Party. Whereas, and I don't want to, put words in your mouth here, but for someone like yourself, or for a lot of people who left the Green Party, I'd say there was a feeling that that's not just what a Green Party is about. That green politics has more to it than just environmental policies.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head there completely when you say that in the mind of myself, certainly, and I know in the mind of many other members of the party, some have left, some who haven't, that it's all well and good to have environmental policies and to impose environmental legislation and stuff, but we have to also be cognizant of the fact that the party only got was it like 12% in the election, and as such, there has to be a focus on other things too, and it has to be reflective like that because somebody made an excellent point when the discussions were happening around whether or not the party should go into government, and it was that look, climate breakdown and climate change is our existential crisis, yeah. But for someone who's sleeping on the street, if you're one of the 10,000 homeless people in Ireland, waking up tomorrow morning is your existential crisis, and getting on with
Yeah.
your life is your existential crisis. And we can do all these great things with environmental policies, but at the end of the day, if they don't cater for the people who live in Ireland now, then really it loses kind of what it's all supposed to be all about. And look, there might be a few wins for the Green Party further down the line, but and this comes back to the whole pragmatism thing too, because in coalition, no one's ever going to be happy 100% of the time, but there will always be the votes against student nurses' pay. There will always be the votes on things that are seen to be very, very negative and very, very contradictory to the position that the Green Party would have held in opposition. And I suppose CETA is the biggest example of that, the biggest example of a complete policy U-turn almost overnight, and almost just with the stroke of a pen. The Green Party now are in favour, or I suppose the Green Party leadership are in favour of CETA, all in the name of pragmatism. But I suppose when does the argument come in then, Evan, that you have to be pragmatic, but you also have to stay true to your own principles and to your own reason why you're there? And I think the Green Party have yet to seriously ask themselves that question. And I think that CETA was, or CETA is, and
Yeah.
continues to be their best chance of asserting themselves and asserting what their fundamentals really are, because CETA is a complete contradiction of what the Green Party were um, what the Green Party were saying in opposition, but also B, it's a complete contradiction of the fundamental policies of the Green Party. So I suppose when we're talking about pragmatism, it is important to be pragmatic, especially in running a country. But there has to come a point where you say, look, we're not that pragmatic. This really is
Yeah,
this really is one of our core ideals.
yeah. Um,
Sorry to interrupt you here, Conal, but I just want to follow up on what you said there. And it's that, especially in green politics, pragmatism has become this word. It's like, oh, we need to be pragmatic, we need to be careful. And yes, we do. But I think time and time again, especially in Ireland, we've seen pragmatism replaced, just used as a thing by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to get the smaller parties just to cooperate with them.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't know where the line of pragmatism start or like ends and just complete concession starts.
yeah, I just want to point out there as well, just the seat of the Conal was chatting about is the trade agreement between Canada and the European
Yes.
Union that the Green Party opposed while out of government, and now they're in government. They're being pragmatic and supporting it, um,
Well,
which,
yeah, I
you
think.
know,
Oh, sorry. This is the thing about having a couple of seconds lag here. Sorry, Evan, for interrupting. Um, but I see what you're saying completely in terms of, when does pragmatism become complete concession? And obviously, pragmatism is concession and pragmatism is compromise. But at the end of the day, if you're going to say compromise but implement 90% of Fine Gael's policies and 10% of your own policies, you can
yeah,
also
you're
say, the argument is there that, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are substantially larger political parties, and as such, they will have more to say and more to be able to get done. But 12 seats is a lot of seats in Irish politics if you look at how divided Irish politics is and certainly has become. And there is a lot of pull there, especially, if you really do want to make a change, now is your best opportunity to actually go and do it, and not to just say,
yeah,
oh, for the sake of a couple of ministries or for the sake of, a half baked climate action bill or a half baked something else, um, that that's the reason you're there. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's I see
Yeah,
completely what you're saying with the whole pragmatism and compromise thing, and I think the Green Party are very, very close to that line, I think, of complete concession and pragmatism, and have it just seems that Leo's word is the final word, Leo Varacker's word is the final word,
yeah.
and that there there's no opposition to conceding to that, whereas I think the most powerful thing that they could be doing is actually standing up and say, hold on a minute, we're also members of this government and we are here to assert ourselves and to fulfill a mandate that actually has been bestowed on us by the people who voted for us.
yeah. I think it's actually really interesting to look at as well. The pressure that's been put on the Green Party to concede to these things during the pandemic. Because obviously, the last thing you
Yeah.
want during a pandemic is a collapse of government, is a coalition that is really out of joint
Yeah.
with itself. So maybe in the coming years now, when things start to sort themselves out a bit more, the Green Party will be more willing to throw its weight on things, to say, hey,
Yeah.
Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, we might be small, but you're still relying on us. You still need us.
So the kingmakers of the coalition, essentially.
Yeah, I understand
Yeah.
it's very pragmatic. You don't want to do that during a pandemic. In fact, I think they'd probably lose out in a lot if they oppose any big policies that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael try to
Um,
implement right
Mm.
now, because they just lose a lot of support from that. But
um,
maybe in the next few years
and
that could
like
I
change.
don't
for the Green Party
I
themselves,
don't
we'll
think
just consider.
in
Oh, I go on there, Conal.
sorry, I'll thank you. No, I really think that the pandemic is irrelevant in the context of climate policy. Um, there hasn't been a pause put on the climate emergency that we're all looking at, and I think that, pandemic or no pandemic, the world is burning, and that there really is no time to actually just say, "Asha, will wait till the pandemic's over," And obviously, huge, huge numbers huge investment has to go into the pandemic at the moment, and quite rightly is the number one priority. But at the same time, the Green Party aren't the pandemic party; they're the Green Party, and they have to
Yeah.
never lose sight of why they are there. And I understand, like, the Green Party, they entered coalition in the middle of a pandemic, and as such, there hasn't been the opportunity to fully discuss climate and to discuss climate policy. And as you say, like, when the world returns to some level of normality, that conversation will certainly be had, and it'll certainly become stronger. But we're already nearly a year into the coalition, and as you say, Evan, it's hard to believe it's been a year. But
Yeah.
that time is running away with every passing day, and we do need to look obviously at the importance of the pandemic, but we also have to remember what it is, what it is the party are there for in the first place.
Um, just on that, Ben, I'd be interested to hear how the Green Party in Germany has dealt with the pandemic and balancing. Do you know where they are in government? If
Yeah,
there's any kind of, information about that, how they're
yeah. No,
balancing
I
needs
find
for.
that really interesting, and what Conal just said. Sort of, I guess because the Irish Green Party is, as I understood it now, I don't know anything about Irish politics, but from what you said, it seems like it's a very much a single issue party, and that is the reason why I guess uh, you quit the party, Conal. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. And I guess that's the big difference to the case in Germany, where there is, as I said, the concern about other issues as well. And when we talk about the pandemic specifically, I think most of the focus always goes onto the government and not really the parties in opposition, because ultimately parties in opposition can say anything and they can always criticize. And so usually what the case is that if it's done well, you applaud the government, and if it's not done well, you criticize the government. um, Obviously the Greens are not in the government on a national level, so we don't really know what's happening there. But
Yeah,
in general, I'd say people are the Green Party has, you know, follows the line of regulations and everything, and they have a clear view of what it should be like. Obviously, there are very different regulations depending on each federal state, and some may criticize that. You always have those, you know, anti-mask demonstrations and everything, but in general, um, I'd say they have a clear position on that, and because they have to, because they are such a bigger party, or they're becoming increasingly bigger, they're also forced to have a view on everything, I guess, and
yeah.
they do have a clear view on the pandemic. Yeah, for sure.
Um, so yeah, so like they've as you were saying there, like they seem to balance that kind of divide fairly well between having to compromise for the pandemic and also staying true to their own to what they believe themselves in their own
Yeah,
manifesto.
yeah.
Bring a bit in there from yourself, Ryan, on Denmark. Um, how are the Danish getting on?
Well, hi there, class. Denmark is often seen as one of the leaders, in Europe at least, of climate change policy. It's they've done very well in recent years. They're seen as one of the leaders. Climate policy in Denmark has often been seen as a sort of socialist issue. It's very like intrinsically linked in Denmark with socialism, like advances
Okay,
in socialism to Denmark, which are to the Danish people what they want.
so not like America where it's a bad word.
Not where it's a bad word, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Socialism has been one of the goals of Denmark's governments for quite a while, I believe. And climate change has become intrinsically linked with that. But so yeah, there's not really one Green Party in Denmark. There's been a multitude of Green parties. There was a Green Party in 1983 that was established. That was the original Green Party, but it really didn't like it saw success. I don't think it was in power at all, but it saw success in sort of putting pressure
Mm.
on governments to implement like just progressive climate policies. Oh, go on there, Conal.
Yeah.
No, no, actually, I was
Yeah.
listening with great intent to what you were saying there, Ryan. I was going to come in with a different point after you were done. Sorry.
All right,
Go
okay.
on.
Well, I started eating a banana there, so give me half a second. What I really like to talk about with Denmark is the approach it's taking to climate policy. Now, there's a coalition up. Well, not a coalition. It's like a not-for-profit sort of scheme. It's called State of Green. It's a public-private partnership between the Danish government and Denmark's four leading business associations.
Okay.
And essentially, the goal of that, since around 1980, since very early on, has been to decouple economic growth from
Carbon.
climate policy, from
Yeah.
so to get rid of the linear relationship between
Economic growth and emissions increasing.
exactly,
Okay,
yeah.
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I think while there's since 1980 there's been a 100% increase in GDP or something of the sort, there's been a 40% decrease in water usage, and there's with that rise in GDP, there's only been a 6% rise in carbon emissions.
Oh,
So
that's-
they've been incredibly successful in in getting rid of this idea that economic growth has to be at the cost of the climate, or that
Yeah,
climate policy
like-
has to be at the cost of economic growth.
I suppose that leads you then, like having that, like I see there in your doc that you have the words holistic approach and integrated view, which like I know those sound like buzzwords a lot of the time, but it makes a lot of sense to have that as a guiding principle of policy, so that at every stage when you're making a decision as a government, that you have that view in that you're going to not build a road, but you're going to build a train if you need to. Yeah, if you need to build more infrastructure. Yep. Yeah, work away there, Conal.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, I was just going to say it's very interesting what you're saying there, Ryan, in terms of the holistic approach and having everyone kind of on board. And it comes back to kind of, in my mind, right, a wider idea that in Ireland and certainly in Irish politics, every party needs to have something of that kind of approach, because people look at, say, I'm going to come back to the Irish Green Party. People look at the Irish Green Party and they just go, okay, well, I'm going to vote for, I don't know, Fine Gael or something because climate just isn't important to me. And
Yeah.
it makes it out that the Greens are just they're the only party with any climate policies at all. Every political party has a climate policy, and that includes my party, the Labour Party. We have our climate policies here as well. Um, but what the point I'm making is that every single party needs to have something to present, and every single party needs to have, you know, and maybe does that beg the question that are the Green Party just seen as, oh right, I care about the environment, so I'll vote for them. Do you know what I mean? And not necessarily, oh, I see that Labour or I see that people before profit are also putting forward environmental policies, but the Green Party are the Green Party, so I'll just take it, I'll vote for them. Do you know, if that makes sense? So I think every political party, it's now incumbent on them to take climate more seriously, and I think that if we see the growth of the climate strikes and the climate movement in Ireland, what party wouldn't want to have stronger climate policies? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
I think
Um,
that's sorry. I think that's an interesting point, and we do see that. I don't know. I guess as you say in Ireland as well, more and more parties take that into their program, and especially again in Germany, or I think most countries,
Mm.
parties have to acknowledge this because it has become such a big issue, such a global issue that will affect every single one of us within the century in some way or another. And so to just fully ignore that is
And
just
it's really
very stupid. Yeah,
and it's really
yeah,
important
there's
that there's
no.
equity involved there too, and that there's whatever policies are formed, there needs to be two pillars to them in my mind, which is the climate justice part, obviously, but the social justice and equity part. And it comes back to the whole
totally.
tax thing that you guys were talking about earlier on in sort of the German context.
Mm.
But in Ireland, tax for the last 10 years, or certainly for the years after the Fianna Fáil Green government were just used to pay off the IMF and to pay off the Troika. And you know, people were paying buckets of tax but seeing very, very little back for it. And now
Mm.
that's kind of why tax is seen in, I suppose, an even worse light in Ireland than maybe it is in other places, because there's this perception that, oh, we're paying tax, but you know, it doesn't go anywhere that's going to benefit me.
Yeah.
Which is why equity is so important, and that equality is so important, and that when we look at things like carbon tax, right, it needs to be framed in such a way where people will see the benefits of it, and people will actually be incentivized to pay their carbon tax, or to lower their emissions, and therefore lower their lower their price of carbon tax. But it just needs that buy-in from political parties. And look, unfortunately, this populist idea of the pay for nothing, get everything philosophy and policy,
Yeah.
is that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
with climate policies and with socialist policies, there has to be a buy-in from the public in terms of paying tax, but also there has to be that strong commitment from the parties in power that this is exactly how we're going to spend your tax. This is exactly how you're going to
Yeah.
see the benefits of buying into our climate policies,
And I
you know?
think
So
a
it really
really
is, it's incumbent on, sorry, I think I'm lagging a little bit again, but I'll just finish with this. I think it's incumbent on the political parties, when they're forming their climate policies, or when they're forming any form of economic policy, to clearly and explicitly outline exactly where it's going to go, because at least then people will be able to make up their mind with that information and with that benefit. And when people see that it's actually going to be good to them, and that climate policies are actually going to be good to them, that's when people are obviously going to vote for them, you know? So it requires
Right.
that little bit of push from political parties to actually show people that this is actually going to be really good for you. It's going to be really good for me, and the bottom line is it's going to be really good for our planet. You know.
Yeah.
100%. I fully
Yeah.
agree. And I think
Go on,
what you
Jay.
mentioned there is like, it's always this idea that when we have restrictions on the climate tax, all of that, that's gonna negatively affect our life. But that's just a completely wrong mindset about this whole idea of climate policy,
Yeah.
because it's
Exactly.
not it's
Yeah.
not that we're depriving ourselves from something. We're just changing it. And obviously change is always seen as something uncomfortable in the beginning. You know, if we only look at the negative things,
Mm.
at what we're restricted to, if we say, you know, we should eat less meat, or the government incentivizes to eat less red meat, if we are incentivized to fly less, or even if we ban flights within the country, things like that, then people
Um,
focus on that
Yeah.
issue. And that's not the right way to go, because we need to look at the alternatives, because that is what we will get back. And the alternatives are what needs to be in the focus. And that's what we're not seeing enough of yet, I believe. I mean, if we look at alternatives to transport, there are incredible ideas. I mean, obviously, just, you know, extending the train network is already so much more
uh,
comfortable.
Yeah.
For example, from London to Paris, you can get in 2 hours. Now, why would anyone take the flight when you can do that comfortably, sit like
my
Yeah.
downtown London to downtown Paris? But
uh,
that
no,
needs to be incentivized, and that needs to become cheaper. And those things need to happen. And so to just promote the alternative is one of the main issues, one of the main points that we need to see. And to come back to your climate tax, I think that's a very important part, because it really isn't a tax in many countries, in Sweden, and the way they propose it in Germany as well, is that most of that money, I think they said 70% in Germany, would actually come back to the citizens. So a lot of people would actually gain more.
Yeah.
Um, and this is, it's very important to say when taxing that a lot of people think, you know, poor people would not be able to afford, or if meat becomes more expensive, things like that. Obviously, we should all be able to afford products that we want to buy. And it's very important to
yeah.
include economically, you know, people with a worse financial situation. And that's, as you say, Conal, a very, very important part of climate policy, to have this equity part in it. And
Uh, yeah.
that's
Well,
something,
well,
again, because there's not enough transparency. Sorry, I'll just finish that. I think transparency is a big part as well. So we don't really know what happens with our money, and all of that. And to make that very clear, to say, well, ultimately, that money comes back to you. And especially the idea of climate tax, it's just those words or restrictions that just keep us from it, and we think, oh, it's going to be bad for us, but actually in the long run we will actually gain so much more, and our life will become more comfortable and more just better in every way, more livable.
Just you were chatting
I
about the
think
train
that,
journeys there.
you know,
Example of that is that if they built a high-speed bullet train from Letterkenny to Dublin, direct,
wouldn't that be amazing? Like,
it'd be 45 minutes. And no reason whatsoever not to go for. And Eamon Ryan, Transport Minister, did you know what?
Go on there, Conal.
Yeah, thanks. And again, sorry if it sounds like I'm very rudely interrupting you. But no, what I was gonna say was just to add on, just to add on to Ben's point about sort of bringing it forward. I heard a great thing being said that, we are currently living in a second industrial revolution, with the way that in the first industrial revolution everything was becoming sort of coal powered, and it was the birth of the combustion engine and things. What we're seeing now is the birth of well, not the birth, but certainly the growth at amazing levels of digital technology and of online technology. And obviously we can see this, we're recording a podcast from all over the country. So we need to ask ourselves, and our politicians and our political parties need to ask themselves, do we want to legislate for the next for the second industrial revolution, or do we not? Because that's really what we're living in here. So we can't continue to look at policies like peat and coal and offshore gas and oil and natural resources sort of extraction. We need to actually look towards things that are going to benefit us in the long run, because what we have found over the last
Yeah.
150 years since the first industrial revolution is that these things don't last forever. And maybe in 150 years' time, someone will look at it and say, actually, well, the stuff that they were using back in 2021 isn't going to last us any longer. So it's incumbent on them to develop it further. But it's up to us now to develop these policies to actually move away from I suppose, 19th century thinking and 20th century thinking, because this is obviously now the 21st century and the world develops, and we need to keep up with that development. Certainly, activists are keeping up with that development, as you could see with the climate strikes and things. But it's really incumbent now on our politicians to actually see that, if they were a politician in the 90s, they might be biased towards 1990s thinking of policy. But really now we really need to look to the future in terms of what we want to leave behind. But I'll wrap that up there because that was a bit of a ramble.
No, that's great.
Just we're coming near the end of the show now.
About 7 minutes left.
Yeah, and there's just one question that I want to put to you, right? Which is, do we still need green parties, right?
This is something that I've got a great take on.
Right. The way I want to frame this is just that if in Germany, right, the Green Party's become more than just a single issue party and encompasses a wide manifesto of different views that aren't just environmentalist, right? And if, Conal, you're right in saying that the Green Party shouldn't just be a single issue party, are Green Parties a necessary part of politics?
I'd love to jump in here with the idea. Now, this could be flawed, and you can jump in and this might not be how politics actually works, but it's just been the way that I've been looking at things over the last while. And I think every successful social movement needs to have a radical sort of wing and a centrist wing to make any sort of progress. I think that when green politics is such a issue, when it's being dealt with so poorly by governments in power, I think we need to have a green party in the sense of not a small green party. I don't want to say a green party. I don't think we should have green parties in power. I don't think green parties should be the ones in power. Now, that's a controversial take. I'll explain it. But I think green parties should be very, very radical parties. I think they should be radical parties that will hopefully get, a few seats, but will have voices in the Dáil.
And they'll push the political spectrum towards
that will get
the
centrist parties, or the centre left or centre right parties, or whoever's in power, to then, meet them about halfway. Maybe not halfway, but to really, come
maybe
out and change their own
maybe this
policies.
isn't the best analogy, but the same way UKIP brought the Conservative Party towards Euroscepticism by threatening to siphon off votes.
Yeah,
Green
exactly.
Party left by threatening to siphon off votes if they don't move towards
Exactly.
left policy.
Yeah, I think like having really pragmatic centrist Green parties is a failure of a Green Party. No Green Party is ever going to be satisfied, or I hope it's not going to be satisfied by what's realistically possible in politics by centrist political parties.
Mhm.
You know, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't really have the capabilities to implement the like real massive changes that need to be made to make a real difference. So I think
Yeah.
Green parties should exist, but they should be far more radical than the one we see
Okay.
in Ireland anyway. But
I
now
think-
Ben's point about Germany kind of counteract that and the fact that they are getting into power and they're seeing a big success. But even in Denmark, you know, like Denmark's one of the most progressive countries in the world when it comes to climate change. But the Green parties aren't in power. You know, they're supporting the current government. And all that, but the Green parties have really radical views, and that has pushed the government in Denmark,
Okay.
the minority or majority governments, into supporting really progressive climate policies.
Hmm.
Go on, Conal.
I'll just say it very quickly because I do know that we're running out of time. Yeah, there is a need for Green parties, but it shouldn't, a Green Party shouldn't be set up as a distraction for everyone else. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be set up and just be like, right, if you want climate, vote for them. Do you know what I mean? Every party does have a role to play in it, but is there a need for a Green Party? I suppose is a different question because you're asking yourself like, is there a need for is is there a need for a Green Party? It's a difficult question to answer, basically. But my point is that Green Party or not, it's incumbent on all other parties to develop climate policies to really, really be reflective of the changes that we need to make. And whether or not there's a Green Party, I suppose, is irrelevant in that because it shouldn't take the existence of a Green Party or the non-existence of a Green Party to dictate whether or not you've got climate policies in your own party or in any other political party,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I find that really interesting. What you said, Ryan, that they should be radical. They shouldn't have that centrist views on things. And part of me agrees, or I'm actually not too sure.
Where am I? Don't worry.
No. I do want to agree on because I think it that's what we're seeing right now. They are becoming less radical, and as I said, there have been smaller parties forming because they say the Greens are not radical enough. And at the same time, though, as you said, Conal, that there also needs to be people want to vote for their political view, and not everyone only has the focus of climate policy. And so when we only have those radical Green parties that only focus on the environment, then that will not represent a big proportion of population, and we might actually see a decline in Green parties because I myself would also question, would I actually vote for that if they really have nothing else to say about immigration and Europe, which are also important issues for me, myself, but also for many voters, as you say, Conal. And so I really think it will be interesting to see, at least in Germany, because this is probably one of the first times that a Western country will have huge Green support and a Green Party in government. And so it will be really interesting to see whether those changes will be implemented starting, the end of this year and for the next 4 years, or as you say, Ryan, that we do need to have more radical parties. So that will be really interesting. Yeah.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up. I just with some facts on the UK Green Party, and I will provide you with two. The first is that they were formed in 1973 as the very first Green Party by a group of men who had all read the same article in Playboy and decided they wanted to form a political party about it. And the second is that...
Will you link that article in the description below?
Yeah. The links will be in the show notes, lads. Second fact is that the Church of England has described climate change as a great demon that needs to be fought. So I think that says everything. No need for green parties at all.
That's just the UK. That's just the UK.
Green parties when you've got to church.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank
We
you
love
so much.
And goodbye.
Thank
Right.
you so much.